The 1960s gave us some of the greatest R&B and soul music ever recorded. But behind those beautiful harmonies, unforgettable grooves, and voices that still move us today, there was another story. A story about records that radio stations refused to play. Songs that were considered too sexual, too political, too black, too angry, and sometimes simply too honest. Some were officially banned. Others were quietly pulled from playlists or refused by individual stations. And in several cases, the controversy only made the records more powerful. So tonight, we're going back to the 1960s, a decade when a 3-minute soul record could challenge racism, sexuality, politics, and the very definition of who was allowed to speak on American radio. These are 15 of the most controversial, banned, restricted, or rejected R&B and soul records of the 1960s. And trust us, by the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why some people in power were so determined to keep these songs off the air. Let's get started. Number 15. Will You Love Me Tomorrow? The Shirelles. In 1960, the Shirelles released a song that sounded sweet enough to belong on every radio station in America. But beneath those gentle harmonies was a question that made conservative broadcasters uncomfortable. Will You Love Me Tomorrow? The song dealt with intimacy, uncertainty, and the emotional consequences of a young woman wondering what would happen after a romantic encounter. At the time, that was a dangerous subject for a teenage girl group. Shirley Owens later recalled that some radio stations considered the lyrics too sexually charged and refused to play the record. Think about that. A song that today sounds almost innocent was considered provocative simply because it acknowledged that young women had romantic desires and emotional concerns. And yet, the controversy couldn't stop it. Released in November 1960, Will You Love Me Tomorrow eventually reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became a landmark recording for black female artists. The irony is beautiful. The very subject that made some programmers uncomfortable helped make the song unforgettable. The Shirelles weren't shouting. They weren't rebelling. They were simply asking a question. And apparently, in 1960, even that could be dangerous. Number 14. Funky Broadway, Dyke and the Blazers. Sometimes a song didn't have to be political or sexual to scare radio programmers. Sometimes one word was enough. In 1967, Dyke and the Blazers brought funk into the mainstream with Funky Broadway. And the word funky itself became a problem. At the time, the term carried associations that some radio programmers considered crude or offensive. Several stations refused to play the record because of its title. Today, that sounds almost unbelievable. Funky is now one of the most harmless words in music. But back then, funk was still developing its identity. The record was raw, rhythmic, physical, and unmistakably connected to the emerging black funk movement. And that made it different from the polished pop soul many mainstream stations were comfortable broadcasting. The irony? Funky Broadway still reached number 17 on the R&B chart. It helped establish Dyke and the Blazers as important figures in the development of funk. While musicians who came after them would take that sound even further. The word they were afraid of eventually became the name of an entire musical revolution. Number 13. Society's Child, Janis Ian. This wasn't a traditional soul record, but its story belongs in any conversation about music censorship in 1960s America. Janis Ian was still a teenager when she wrote Society's Child, and the subject was explosive, an interracial relationship. The song tells the story of a young woman whose romance is opposed because of racial prejudice. Some radio stations refused to play it. Others avoided it because they feared the reaction from listeners. Ian later described receiving angry responses and racially charged threats surrounding the song. Walk me down to school, babe. Imagine being a teenager and writing a song that forces adults to confront a subject they would rather ignore. That's exactly what Society's Child did. It didn't need screaming guitars. It didn't need profanity. Its controversy came from one simple idea. What happens when two people fall in love and society tells them they shouldn't? Released in 1966, the song eventually became a top 20 hit, and that was the pattern of the 1960s. The more uncomfortable the subject became, the more important the song sometimes became. Number 12. Keep On Pushin', The Impressions. Before Curtis Mayfield became one of soul music's most important political voices, he was already using the Impressions to say things that made radio programmers nervous. Keep On Pushing was released in 1964. Musically, it was uplifting. Spiritually, it was powerful. But beneath those beautiful harmonies was a message of determination during the Civil Rights era, and some radio stations didn't want to hear it. The song was banned by several stations, including Chicago's powerful WLS. Why? Because Mayfield wasn't simply singing about romance. He was singing about black people refusing to surrender. The song's message of perseverance connected directly with the growing civil rights movement. For listeners living through segregation, demonstrations, police violence, and political upheaval, those words meant something. They sounded like encouragement. They sounded like resistance. And resistance was precisely what made certain programmers uncomfortable. The record still became a major success. Curtis Mayfield was discovering something that would define his career. You could put a political message inside a beautiful melody, and millions of people would sing it back. Number 11. Mississippi Goddamn, Nina Simone. If there was one artist who refused to whisper during the Civil Rights era, it was Nina Simone. And Mississippi Goddamn was her declaration that she was done whispering. Everybody knows about Mississippi Goddamn. Written in 1964, after the murders of Medgar Evers and the 4 girls killed in the Birmingham church bombing, the song attacked racism with extraordinary directness. There was no comforting metaphor, no polite language, no attempt to make the message easier for white America to swallow. Everybody knows about Mississippi. The title alone was explosive. The song was banned in several southern states. Promotional copies sent to radio stations were reportedly returned with the records physically broken in half.
School children sitting in jail.
Imagine receiving a record and breaking it before even allowing your listeners to hear it. But that reaction tells you everything. Nina Simone had turned rage into music.
I'm gonna get it in due time. I don't belong.
She had taken the anger of a generation and put it over a sophisticated musical arrangement that sounded almost like a theatrical performance. And that's what made it so powerful.
And my people just about do. I've been there.
It wasn't simply a protest song. It was confrontation. Nina Simone wasn't asking America to change. She was demanding that America look at itself.
Picking the cotton.
Number 10. We're a Winner. The Impressions. 1968, Curtis Mayfield had become one of the most important voices in Black America. Then came We're a Winner. And some radio programmers heard something they didn't like. Confidence, Black pride, independence. The song wasn't asking for permission. It was announcing victory.
And I don't care where you come from.
Major stations, including Chicago's WLS, refused to play it. Station executives later described the issue differently, but members of the Impressions recalled that the song was considered too militant. And that's important, because the record didn't sound violent. It sounded joyful. The rhythm was infectious, the melody was bright, but underneath the groove was a message of Black empowerment. That combination made the record revolutionary. You could dance to it, you could sing along, and at the same time, you were hearing a Black artist telling his audience that they had every right to believe in themselves. The song still became a #1 R&B hit and reached the pop top 20. The stations that wouldn't play it couldn't stop it. And Curtis Mayfield was only getting started. Number 9. We Got More Soul. Dyke and the Blazers.
Telling the world.
Here's where censorship gets particularly strange. In 1969, Dyke and the Blazers released We Got More Soul. The title sounded like a boast, and that's exactly how one radio station interpreted it. WLTH in Gary, Indiana, banned the song because officials believed the title implied that Black people had more soul than white people. Yes, that was the controversy. Not profanity, not sex, not drugs. A claim of Black musical pride. The record was essentially saying, we have our own sound, our own culture, our own rhythm, our own identity. And apparently, even that could be considered threatening. The song eventually became a major R&B success, reaching number 7 on the R&B chart. But its story tells us something fascinating about the late 1960s. Soul music was no longer simply entertainment. It had become a statement of identity. And when a song could make people question racial hierarchy without ever mentioning politics directly, some broadcasters didn't know what to do with it. So they did what broadcasters had been doing for years. They reached for the switch. Number 8. Say It Loud. I'm Black and I'm Proud. James Brown. Few titles in soul music are more direct. James Brown didn't hide the message. He didn't soften it. He didn't put it behind a metaphor. He said it loud. And some radio stations refused to play it.
Talk about baby. Sure
One notable example was KGFJ in Los Angeles, which initially refused to broadcast the record. Brown responded publicly, challenging the station's decision. And this wasn't just another James Brown hit. It arrived in 1968, during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. The civil rights movement was evolving. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. Cities were erupting in unrest. Black Americans were increasingly embracing the language of Black Power. And James Brown put all of that energy into a funk record. The children on the recording answered Brown's call and response. The groove was infectious. The message was impossible to misunderstand. And that's why the song mattered. It wasn't simply saying black people deserved equality. It was saying black people had the right to be proud of who they were. Some stations considered that too radical, but the audience didn't. The record became #1 on the R&B chart, and James Brown proved that sometimes the best way to defeat censorship is to make the message impossible to ignore. Number 7. Let's Spend the Night Together, The Rolling Stones. Now we're stepping slightly outside traditional R&B, but this song's censorship story is too important to leave out. In 1967, the Rolling Stones released Let's Spend the Night Together. The title alone was enough to trigger a reaction. American radio stations reduced airplay, edited the record, or avoided it completely. But the biggest confrontation came on television. When the Stones appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, producer and host Ed Sullivan demanded that Mick Jagger change the lyric. Instead of singing Let's Spend the Night Together, Jagger agreed to sing Let's Spend Some Time Together. But he wasn't exactly happy about it. During the performance, Jagger dramatically rolled his eyes toward the camera. It became one of the most memorable moments in the history of televised music censorship. The controversy wasn't about explicit language. It was about the suggestion of sexual intimacy. In 1967, simply proposing that a man and woman spend the night together could be enough to make a television network nervous. And that's what made the 1960s such an interesting period. The culture was changing faster than the gatekeepers could keep up. Number 6. Mother's Little Helper, The Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones weren't finished challenging the censors. In 1966, they released Mother's Little Helper. Yellow pill, she goes running for the shelter. The song dealt with prescription drug dependence and the pills that some suburban housewives were using to cope with everyday life. It was dark. It was sarcastic. And it was unusually direct for mainstream pop music. The BBC banned the song from radio because of its explicit references to drugs. But the record's deeper message was even more uncomfortable. Bands a frozen steak and goes running for the shelter. The Stones weren't simply saying drugs were bad. They were asking why ordinary people were turning to them in the first place. She's outside the door. She took for more. The perfect suburban home wasn't always perfect. The smiling mother wasn't always happy. And sometimes, behind the clean curtains and respectable neighborhood, there was anxiety, loneliness, and chemical escape. Men just aren't the same today. I hear every For a decade increasingly fascinated by counterculture, the song captured a reality many adults didn't want to discuss. You through the night helped to minimize your plight. The controversy helped establish the Stones as one of the decade's great musical provocateurs. And it proved that a song didn't need profanity to be dangerous. Sometimes, telling the truth was enough.
What a drag it is.
We've reached the halfway point, but here's where this countdown gets even more interesting, because the first 10 songs showed us something important. In the 1960s, a record could be restricted because it was sexual. It could be rejected because it challenged racial attitudes. It could disappear from a playlist because a programmer thought its message was too political.
Frozen steak and goes running for the shelter of.
But the next 5? These are the records where censorship, controversy, race, sexuality, religion, and the changing social order collide head-on. And number 1 isn't simply controversial. It represents one of the moments when R&B stopped asking for permission altogether. So before we get into the final 5, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because this is the RnB Room, where we dig beyond the hits and uncover the stories that made soul music what it became. And if one of these songs brings back a memory, tell us about it in the comments. Now, let's get into the final 5. Number 5. Louie Louie, The Kingsmen. This one wasn't technically R&B, but it became one of the most famous censorship scandals of the entire 1960s. The Kingsmen's 1963 recording of Louie Louie became a national hit. And then, somebody decided the lyrics sounded dirty. The problem? Almost nobody could actually understand what the singer was saying. Rumors spread that the record contained obscene lyrics. Teenagers circulated supposedly secret versions of the words. Parents became alarmed. Politicians became involved. And Indiana Governor Matthew Welsh took action against the song in 1964. The FBI even investigated the recording. After extensive analysis, investigators were unable to establish that the recording contained the obscene lyrics people claimed were hidden inside it. But by then, the damage was done. The record had become a national symbol of teenage rebellion. And that's the strange thing about censorship. Sometimes the attempt to suppress a song makes people even more curious about it. Louie Louie became bigger because people were told they weren't supposed to listen. The alleged dirty lyrics became part of the mythology. And decades later, the song remains one of the most famous examples of a moral panic surrounding a record. Number 4. Je t'aime, moi non plus. Jane Birkin and Serge Gainsbourg. This isn't an American R&B record either. But if we're talking about controversial music from the 1960s, this one deserves a place. Je t'aime, moi non plus was released in 1969, and it was unmistakably sensual. The intimate vocal performance and erotic atmosphere caused broadcasters to react strongly. The BBC banned the record. The song still became a major international hit. In Britain, it reached number 2 before being withdrawn, then returned to the charts after being reissued through another label. In America, it also faced criticism and limited airplay. The reason this record matters to the story of R&B is simple. The 1960s were breaking down old ideas about what popular music could discuss. Soul artists were talking about black identity. Rock artists were confronting sexual morality. And European pop was pushing sensuality into territory mainstream radio wasn't prepared to accept. The walls were coming down, and every controversial record seemed to knock another brick loose. By the end of the decade, the question wasn't whether music would become more provocative. It was how far it could go.
Je veux et je viens.
Number 3. Society's Child. The story behind the controversy.
Faces clean and shining black as
Yes, we've already mentioned Janice Ian. But there's a reason the record deserves another look as we approach the final 3.
your boy instead of your name.
Society's Child wasn't controversial because it was obscene. It was controversial because it confronted racism through romance.
When she wouldn't let you inside.
A teenage girl wanted to be with someone she loved, but society told her that love had boundaries, and those boundaries were racial. Some stations avoided the song. Some listeners reacted angrily. Ian faced threats and hostility, and yet the record became a hit. That tells us something important about the 1960s music industry.
Don't you just stick to your own kind?
Censorship wasn't always about profanity. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a song could do was make listeners empathize with someone they had been taught to fear.
Creatures of equality.
A love song could become a political statement without ever announcing itself as one. And that's exactly what happened here. The record forced listeners to confront an uncomfortable question. What happens when society decides who you're allowed to love? That question still resonates today. But in the 1960s, simply asking it publicly could get your record pushed away from the radio. Number 2. 4 Women. Nina Simone.
My arms are long.
In 1966, Nina Simone released one of the most powerful and controversial songs of her career.
My hair is woolly.
4 Women introduced 4 black women, each representing a different stereotype created by American society. Aunt Sarah represents generations of hardship and forced strength.
Spinning.
Saffronia represents the painful reality of being mixed race in a divided America. Sweet Thing represents the sexualization of black women. And Peaches represents anger, frustration, and defiance.
Yellow.
Simone wasn't celebrating these stereotypes, she was exposing them. But some listeners saw the song differently. Radio stations in New York and Philadelphia restricted its airplay after complaints that the lyrics portrayed black women in an offensive way.
Worlds.
And suddenly, the song raised a difficult question. Was Nina Simone reinforcing stereotypes or destroying them?
He forced my mother late one night.
Listen closely, and her intention becomes clearer. The music is slow and haunting. Simone doesn't rush through the stories. She makes you sit with each woman and consider what society has done to her.
And my hair's alright. It's fine.
By the time Peaches arrives, Simone's voice becomes harder and more furious. The anger is no longer hidden. You can feel it. That's what made 4 Women so dangerous. It wasn't simply a song. It was social commentary.
Why yours if you got some?
It challenged racism, sexism, and the way black women had been reduced to stereotypes. Stations could restrict the song. They couldn't stop people from discussing it. Decades later, 4 Women remains one of Nina Simone's defining recordings. It showed that soul music could be more than romance and entertainment. It could tell uncomfortable truths. It could challenge the audience. And it could make people think. That is why 4 Women takes the number 2 spot. But now there's only one song left. And our number 1 pushed against censorship in a way that would change the conversation completely.
My life has been much.
Number 1. Number 1 spot.
Look at here. I make all the little girls happy.
The 1960s changed R&B. Artists pushed against restrictions surrounding race, sexuality, politics, and identity.
That's what all the girls call me. I give 'em all.
Some records were banned, others were restricted or rejected by individual stations, but the music survived. And decades later, we're still talking about it. This is the RnB Room. Keep the groove alive.
While the boys are out to play.